Thursday, September 25th, 2003. This is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Mack Abbott. Mr. Abbott served in the United States Marine Corps during World War II. This interview is being conducted at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Frederick Wallace, and I am the interviewer. Mr. Abbott, as I explained to you earlier, this is your story, and we want you to tell it in your own words. You began at the beginning of your enlistment and take us all the way through to the date of your separation. Mr. Abbott, this is your story. Will you begin, please?
Thank you, Fred. Well, let's begin at Parris Island, mid-1941. At that particular time, they had the draft on, and if you were not in school at that time, you were drafted in the Army. Well, it just so happens that the Marine Corps had beautiful pictures in front of post offices and all around saying, join the Marine Corps and see the world. So I joined the Marine Corps in mid-1941. And as a private, I completed boot camp. And then after I finished boot camp, they sent me to water engineering school at Quantico, Virginia. On completion water engineering school, I was sent to California, put aboard the USS Lexington aircraft carrier to be transported to Pearl Harbor. And I arrived in Pearl Harbor about mid-October. Well, I've reported in at Pearl Harbor to the 3rd Defense Battalion, which is there at the Marine Barracks right next to the docks there in Pearl Harbor. And the lieutenant came out and said, well, Abbott, I see you're a water engineer, so I think I'll make you PFC. So I was made a private first class. Well, it wasn't too long before one morning. Let me go back and give a little history about the Japanese first before I get into talking about them. Let's go back to 1930. At that time, the Naval Academy in Japan required all cadets to write a thesis on what they thought about the Japanese taking over the islands in the Pacific that belonged to the United States, and what would be the end results. In 1931, the Japanese started bombing China. 1937, they invaded China and committed many atrocities. And in 1940, the United States could not put up with it, so they imposed an embargo on Japan and froze all assets. Now let's go to the morning of December 7, 1941. We should have known about Pearl Harbor before it happened, really. But there was 2 Army privates that was on a radar that morning, and they picked up a bogey out at 6:45 in the morning. They phoned the officer on duty and told him. The officer on duty told him to forget about the bogeys. There are B-17s coming in from the States to secure the radar and to go on back to the barracks. These 2 Army privates did not. They kept on that radar and they plotted it every minute.
Just a moment. Yeah.
Those 2 men tracked the Japanese planes all the way into Pearl Harbor, and which was at 7:55 in the morning. At that time, I just got back from breakfast. I had dressed early. I was going over to the civilian airfield to take flying lessons that morning. When I got back to my second story barracks, 2 of my friends were sitting on my bunk, which was at the end of the hall. They still in their skivvies. But I sat there and started talking with them, and about that time we heard an explosion, which was over in the area where the ships were. We thought at first they were dynamiting, which they had been doing some construction work in the area. But about that time, a plane flew so close to my window that I could have hit it with a rock. and I could see the insignia on the plane, and I saw two Japanese that appeared to be looking at us and just smiling. Well, we all three said right away, we're being attacked by the Japanese. So I grabbed my 1903 Springfield rifle and steel helmet and cartridge belt and ran downstairs to the armory. I ran into the army, and the corporal there said, "Where are you going?" And I says, "I'm coming in here to get some ammunition. We're being attacked by the Japanese." And he said, "Well, you got to have a requisition to get to get ammunition." So about that time, a sergeant walked in, and he says, "Give this man some ammunition. We're being attacked." So he says, "I only have one bandolier," and he laid it up on the counter. And he said, "But I got plenty in the back in crates." So I grabbed the one bandolier, went on the parade field out in the front of the barracks there, and started firing at the planes as they flew over the ships, dropping their bombs, and over the top of our barracks. And they were flying very slowly at this point, coming out of a dive, I suppose. But we have to remember also that these planes at that period of time had no armament. So I fired at the planes, getting one or two shots off at the pilot himself. In about 15 minutes, there was possibly a dozen or so men out there on the parade field doing the same thing I was doing. And after the raid was over, several men got in a truck to go over and see one of the planes that was down real near us. And they went over there and brought back a wing from the plane and put it in front of our barracks so everybody could get a souvenir from the plane we shot down. And they said that the pilot had 9 holes in him. Well, after that, truck drove up and says, "We need some help over to docks." So 3 of us jumped on the truck, and we went over to the docks and helped men out of the water that were wounded, and some were burned real bad. We put them on a truck, and we took them over to the hospital. The hospital was full, so we laid them out on the grass, grass in front of the hospital, and there were Navy corpsmen there looking after them. We made several trips like that, and then we went on back to our barracks, and there was a notice on the bulletin board that I was to go on guard duty. So I was taken to guard duty over at the tank farm, which the Japanese didn't hit, but they were expecting sabotage. That night, there were several fires in the sugarcane fields, and I kind of thought that that was possibly maybe a signal for possible invasion or something. I didn't know, but I was very alert.
Mr. Abbott, let me stop you here. You mentioned that you were looking out of your barracks window and you saw Japanese airplanes
It was
flying
about
by.
as far as that door right there.
How far was your barracks from the ships in the harbor?
All right. You want me to start there?
Well, just clarify that. That's all.
I'll clarify it. There was just a small row of warehouses and another row of our barracks. In other words, they flew right over the ships, right over this little row of warehouses at the very top of the buildings and of the barracks there. And our other barracks was in another slant, in another direction.
So your barracks was on the Pearl Harbor naval
Yes,
base?
correct.
Very good. Okay, go ahead, please.
Now, let me think a second where I was.
You were on guard duty.
Oh, I was on guard duty. Well, the next day, Jeep drove up and gave us some water and a small can. And on the cans it said, World War I hardtack. Believe me, it was hard. But I did put it in some water and soaked it and was able to eat it. I'd like to say that at that particular time, that next day, the MPs were going around the island picking up all the Japanese that had been to Japan in the past 6 months or had dual citizenship, and they put them in a concentration camp. However, they did. The government did give them $20,000 for their inconvenience after the war. Well, after guard duty, I went on back and I got word that I was to be ready at midnight to leave. And they took us and put us aboard a destroyer. And we pulled out at daylight the next day. As we got out of the channel, not very far, they went into general quarters. We went below deck, and they dropped some ash cans, and we heard the explosions. And then we were told later that there was 2 subs out there, and another destroyer that was in our convoy actually sank one of them, and the other one got away. Well, we went on, and then one night, by the way, it was such a small area down there, we had to double up on our bunks, and it was hot in that hold. However, one night we were told to be very quiet, that we were about 300 miles from Wake, and that we were supposed to reinforce Wake there. However, we could not do this because we were in the middle of the Jap fleet, and they were going to have to separate. So part of the convoy went to Johnson Island, part went to Midway, and part went to Palmyra Island. I was on the destroyer that went to Palmyra Island with another ship that had our equipment on it. We got to Palmyra Island, and we got ourselves ready to fight the Japanese if they tried to get on that island. One day the top sergeant called me and said, "Say, Abbott, aren't you a water engineer?" I told him I was. And he says, "Well, it shows in your record. Get your sea bag packed and get on down here. The lieutenant says we're going to send you to Midway because they're radioing that they've got problems with their water there at Midway. And we'll radio them, tell them that you're coming up there to see if you can help them." So I didn't have to wait too long before I got a plane up to Midway. When I got to Midway and reported in, they told me they didn't have a water problem. So I said, okay. And they said, "We got an old distillation unit up here on the water that's not working. If you can make that work, we'd appreciate the water." So I did. I went over there, had it fixed today. All it needed was a little maintenance. And then one day, a truck came up to where I was making water with another PFC and a 50 caliber machine gun. And they unloaded and said, "Abbott, put some sandbags around this 50 caliber machine gun and around your units. We're going to be attacked." So the Japanese did attack, and I fired the 50 caliber machine gun. I'd never fired one before, so I really didn't know how to lead with this 50 caliber machine gun. Consequently, I know I didn't hit anything. I might have scared them a little bit, I don't know. Well, after that, I was there for a while, and then...
Was the Japanese attacked by land or by air?
This was air.
Oh,
In other
so
words,
the planes came over.
The planes flew over and dropped their bombs there on the airstrip and so forth. So after I was there for a while, I was told to get ready to go aboard ship. We went aboard ship, and we went to Canal. And there, after we landed, I was joined with the same outfit that I was in at Pearl Harbor, the 3rd Defense. And we were now under the 1st Division. Well, our group was one of the first to land. And there is a place where we had a lot of problems besides the Japanese, namely malaria, dengue, and so forth. And I myself had dengue and was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. But on Guadalcanal, they had given me a Brownie automatic rifle and says, "Abbott, we're going to give you a Brownie automatic rifle, and you're going to make $7 a month more than you're making as a PFC." So anyhow, I was in a section there, and we did have a lot of problems with the Japanese because they kept landing more and more of them there, and we were very short on ammunition to start with because the ships couldn't stay in there long enough to give us our ammunition and equipment and food.
Why were you being paid more? Was that a promotion?
For carrying a Brownie automatic rifle. It was about twice the weight of a rifle. So I had to carry it along with my rifle.
Also, the increase in pay
Right,
was...
because you see, a Brownie automatic rifle, I could pull a trigger and shoot 3 shots at one time.
I understand. Go ahead.
But I couldn't use it initially because we didn't have enough ammunition, so I had to use my rifle until we got ammunition, and then I used the BAR. Well, part of our outfit was over in Tulagi on the next island, so after I was there for a few months in Guadalcanal, I was sent over there to reinforce them. They had lost quite a few men. And then when they got some new men, they sent me back to Guadalcanal again. So I was there possibly over 6 months on Guadalcanal. And the reason why Guadalcanal was so important was because the Japanese had to have the Guadalcanal in order to be able to bomb Australia. And this was the ultimate goal, was Australia. And I think our people were just as determined that they wasn't going to get the island. Well, after I'd spent about a year and a half in combat, I was sent back to Pearl Harbor, and then they gave me some clothes, because the only thing I had was what was on my back. And they took us down and put, it must have been about 80 of us on a luxury liner called the Matsonia. Well, they put 2 of us to the stateroom, and then they put a guard down at the end of the hall. Well, I don't know why. I guess they just didn't want us wandering around. But on the 3rd day, they took us down to the dining room, and 4 ladies did the hula dance for us. Believe it or not, these are the first ladies I've seen this close in over a year and a half. We did whistle a little bit and hooted and so forth, but we were very good. Nothing other than that. And then we went back to our stateroom. Well, we got into San Francisco and went down the ramp, and there was a booth down there, and it said Salvation Army. It said Red Cross. And it said send a letter, wire home to your parents. So I wrote out a wire to my parents to let them know I was going to get a 3rd day furlough. And then I took it up to them, and they said it'd be $2. I said, I ain't been paid in so long, I don't know. I don't even have but even a little change. So I walked on over to another booth there. It was the Salvation Army, and I said, well, how much do you charge? And they said, we don't charge anything. So I did get my wire off to my parents. Then we went on over to the naval base there, where they put a lieutenant, a Marine in charge of us to take us to San Diego. We got on the train, got as far as Los Angeles, and he said, well, y'all can get off here. We've got a couple hours layover here. So some of the guys went over to a liquor store and got some whiskey and came back, and the train started up again, and pretty soon there's a couple of them there was dueling with bayonets, just in fun, of course. And then pretty soon again, the train stopped, and then we were taken off and put on buses to take the rest of the way into San Diego. We got there about 9 o'clock in the morning, and some of the guys fell off of the bus that brought us in there, and that didn't go over so good because there was some officers across the street there that were coming to work. But we went on in the barracks there, and about the time we got inside the barracks, there was a radio playing, and it was Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said that those Marines coming back from Guadalcanal should be put in a concentration camp for at least 30 days so they'll know how to take care of our ladies at home. Well, that didn't go over good at all with us. And about that time, one of the guys put a round of ammunition in his rifle and fired it up in the ceiling. Then the place was loaded with MPs, and they took our rifles and ammunitions away from us. I went and had 30-day furlough, and then went to New River, North Carolina, where I reported in, and it was my old commanding officer, Lieutenant Curtis. However, he was major now, and he said that he had requested me and 3 others so that we could form a new outfit, and I would be made sergeant and section leader.
Let me ask you a question. You said you went and spent your 30-day furlough. Where did you spend your furlough?
I went to Oregon, where my father was a provost marshal up there. Now, let me say this, that when he heard about me being at Pearl Harbor, he went down and told me he wanted to go in the service. So they took him back in. He was a private in France in World War I, but they made him a lieutenant and said, we won't let you go overseas though. So they made him a provost marshal, and he made captain real fast. And that's where I spent my 30-day furlough, was with my mother and father. And of course they originally were in Houston, but they were in Oregon is where they had him stationed.
I see, okay. Go ahead, please.
Well, Major Curtis said to me, he said, well, Abbott, we don't have any men yet, so I'm going to send you to Japanese school. So he sent me to Japanese school to learn a little bit about the language. And I came back, he still didn't have any men, so he said, I'm going to send you to the Army, because you're going to have a small radar in your group and 25 men. I said, all right. So I went to this Army school, and as soon as I got there, I put my gear on an empty bunk, and the sergeant came up to me and said, say, you're on mess duty tonight. I said, no way. NCOs in the Marine Corps do not do mess duty. And I don't think he liked it because he left right away. Went over to the officers' quarters there, and pretty soon he came back and said, say, the lieutenant wants to see you. So I walked in to the lieutenant's office, my hat in my hand, stood at attention in front of him. He looks up at me and says, well, don't Marines salute in the Marine Corps? Don't they salute officers? I said, yes, sir, when we're covered, we do. But I'm uncovered right now. Well, go on back to the barracks, he said. So I went back to the barracks and heard no more from him until I graduated. And then when I did, I called a motor pool and told him I need transportation back to the bus line, which was about 3 miles away. He says, I don't have anything available, you just have to walk it. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Let me read you my orders here. It says that you will furnish me transportation immediately on completion of school for me to come back to my base. So we had a Jeep there in about 5 minutes. And I went back to camp, and we did have our men there at that time, and so we took, I took my men, went across the river and set up our tents and started our training. After we completed training, we were sent to San Diego. We got to San Diego, they took us out to what was called Camp Elliott, just outside of San Diego. Well, that particular tent camp didn't have any hot water, and it was the middle of winter. And I'll tell you, cold water is no fun to shower and shave in. Well, when the ship did come in, we got aboard, and we went to Inuita. Inuita had already been secured, so our ship went to anchor in the channel, and because they were waiting on a convoy to pick us up. So we just jumped off the boat and swam and things like that. So after about 30 days, we were low on supplies, so we had to start eating C&K rations and bathing in salt water, using saltwater soap, which wasn't any fun. Well, then the convoy did come pick us up, and we went and landed at Saipan. Well, the unusual thing about Saipan was a lot of things, but this was, the most unusual thing was that this was the first joint venture that they had with the Army. The Army was to take the middle row, and we were supposed to take the outer 2 rows and meet at the other end of the island. I was now in the 2nd Division of Marine Corps. So we went along, and pretty soon the Army dropped way back, and the Japs were getting in behind us, which caused quite a problem. Well, our commanding officer, we call him Howling Mad Smith. Now, the Army officer or general was named Smith, but Howling Mad Smith was a senior. So he went back and tried to get him to come forward, and the guy was just too cautious. He says he's trying to keep from losing more men. Well, anyhow, so General Smith went aboard the ship, talked to the admiral about it, and then he came back and relieved the Army Smith, and he went back to the ship, and they put another general out there to take over the Army, and he did real good. He kept up with us all the way through the island. We got to the other end of the island, then they put us aboard a landing barge to go to Tinian, which was just a short distance away. As we got into Tinian, there were a lot of bodies floating around, and the barge had to push them aside for us to land. And we were told that the Japs told these civilians that the Marines would murder the men and rape the women and kill the children. and so they jumped off a cliff. A lot of the civilians did. Well, we did land, and I ended up on the other end of the island, up on a hill at Tinian, and Tinian was to be the major B-29 base for B-29s to raid Japan. Well, one day after we had secured the island, I had a call from my commanding officer, Curtis. He was over the Marines on Saipan and Tinian. And he told me that the General Spats was losing airplanes coming back in at nighttime. They couldn't find the island. And he wanted me to shine my searchlight out on top of the water to give an azimuth at a certain time every night, which I did. And the Japs didn't like it. They kept trying to put it out. I moved my perimeter up another 200 yards to help give us more protection. And then they still didn't like it and kept shooting at it. But they didn't do any good because it had to have direct hit in order to do any damage, right in the middle. Well, this went on for a while, and then it was all secured. A week later, Colonel Curtis called me and said, "Abbott, General Spatz called and says he's going to give your group a commendation letter for the problems that you had with the Japanese." Well, we got a big laugh out of that. You can imagine a Marine getting a commendation letter from an Army. Well, I was told then that I was assigned to the 5th Division and to move my camp on down towards the dock because we was going to be picked up. And I found out later that we were supposed to go land at Kyushu in Japan on November the 1st. Well, I got down there and selected a site at an Army camp, so I went and asked them if I could put my tents up next to them and eat with them and use their facilities, which was all right with them. Well, this worked out real good for me. And then one day Curtis called me and said, "Mack, you know, Saipan and Tinian is surrendered. And we'd like you to go up there to where some caves are and tell the Japanese that they have surrendered, and tell other people that they surrender, and we would take them in as prisoners of war and take good care of them." So I got 7 men, went up on the hill, and I told them not to fire them because I wanted to get prisoners or to talk to them. So I spoke the best Japanese language I could,